It's March 26, 1997, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Ariel, Rebecca, and Ali, the Retrospectors.
If you were going to choose one last pair of shoes to take you into the afterlife, would you go for smart or comfy? Well, the followers of the Heaven's Gate cult went for comfort, all putting on matching box-fresh Nikes and then, entirely unthinkably, drinking lethal doses of a sedative in the hope that the passing Hale-Bopp comet would speed them to heaven, a shocking act that the world learnt about today in history in 1997.
Yeah, police had responded to an anonymous tip-off that later turned out to be from a former member, Rio D'Angelo, who had received a farewell VHS tape put together by the group. The members had been encouraged by the sect's leader, Marshall Applewhite, to put together these videos for their loved ones. They knew that this mass suicide was coming. He didn't try and hide it from them. He said, we're doing it. And so you have these videos, some of which you can watch online, and they are very unsettling because these people, 39 members of the group, they are recording these messages with big smiles. They're in this peaceful garden. And Applewhite himself recorded a video too. It was called Doe's Final Exit. Doe was the name he went by, in which he explained that the moment had come to leave Earth. But D'Angelo, when he received this VHS tape, realised, of course, that something was horribly wrong. I mean, they'd spelt out their intentions. So he tipped the police off, who then responded, going to this large property that the group had been renting outside San Diego. They called it the Monastery. And inside, they found the bodies of these 39 people who were aged between 26 and 72. And all but two of them were neatly laid out on their beds with their face and chest covered with a cloth. The final two remained where they had died. They had plastic bags over their head, and that striking element of their attire was the fact that all 39 were wearing matching black shirts and jogging bottoms and black and white Nike Decades, and Decades themselves became a joke for a while because they became so associated with this shocking act, and Nike actually discontinued them afterwards. They do fetch big bucks on the resale market.
Yeah, there was no significance to those sneakers, by the way, apart from the fact that the kind of general aesthetic of Heaven's Gate was to look like sort of ageless, genderless space angels. And on this day, before they covered themselves in purple shrouds, that's another thing that, this moment is famous for, they wanted to look clean and ready for, as you put it, their exit. They really did absolutely firmly believe that they were about to head off onto a spaceship and into eternal life. And so when the police turned up and looked at their bodies and the autopsy confirmed this, they realised that it had taken them 3 days for all of them to kill themselves. And yet there was no blood, there was no trauma, there was no force. The Washington Post, watching the footage that the police took, wrote the next day in the newspaper, quote, "The death mansion wasn't really a home. It was just another in a series of sterile rented houses. They could promise the owners truthfully that despite their great numbers, they would leave no mark, no sign that anyone had lived there. In the silent video of the corpses lying on bunk beds, there is no sign of decorations on the walls and few personal effects." And that speaks to how they had behaved in all of the years leading up to this big moment. The whole modus operandi of the cult was not just to give up, wall hangings, but to give up everything, all your individual fashion markers, all your possessions, and all your friends and family.
Yeah, all of that is captured on the Heaven's Gate website, which is still up, by the way. It's still going.
Yeah, heavensgate.com.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
A snapshot of not only the belief system of Heaven's Gate, the cult itself, but also
mid-90s web design, which I was excited to see.
It's all sort of rainbow coloured against black. It's very quintessential now that you sort of look
I
at
had a
that.
GeoCities that looked exactly the same.
Right. Well, probably different content because the content...
Yeah, mine was about neighbours.
Right. So there's this very nice welcoming note from Doe, as he called himself, Applewhite, explaining what the cult is all about. And it's kind of like an elevator pitch. It rattles through his philosophy very, very quickly. It begins, 2,000 years ago, a member of the kingdom of heaven left his body up in the next level, similar to putting it in a closet like a suit of clothes that doesn't need to be worn for a while, came to Earth and moved into, or incarnated into, an adult human body, brackets, or vehicle that had been prepped for this particular task, by which he means bringing people to heaven. The body that was chosen was called Jesus. And then you skip ahead a bit, he goes on, our mission is exactly the same. I am in the same position to today's society as was the one that was in Jesus back then. My being here now is actually a continuation of that last task, as was promised, to bring those students 2,000 years ago to heaven. So it really is the culmination of Applewhite's religious thinking. He'd actually grown up in a strongly religious household and then had this sort of midlife crisis. He'd struggled with questions about his sexuality and had reportedly been in an inappropriate, in inverted commas, relationship with a male student and was then dismissed from his job. His marriage collapsed soon after, and by the 1970s, he was experiencing these really kind of personal, emotional, psychological turmoil. And during this period of personal crisis, Applewhite met with a woman called Bonnie Lou Nettles. She was a nurse with a strong interest in mysticism, astrology, and spiritual healing. And they soon, once they'd come together, they formed this really intense spiritual partnership. Nettles convinced Applewhite that they had this cosmic purpose and that they had been chosen as messengers from a higher extraterrestrial realm.
Yeah, they hit it off majorly. They believed that they had met in a past life. They saw each other as soulmates. Nettles believed she had supernatural gifts and she could receive messages from extraterrestrial life forms. Applewhite agreed. Nettles' husband did not agree. He filed for divorce and he won custody of their 3 minor children. So then Applewhite and Nettles went on the road. They were working odd jobs. They were living off bread rolls sometimes, trying to spread the word of this new religion. Basically a mixture of Christianity and sci-fi. The Bible is true and so are aliens, and Nettles can communicate with them. And that those who accepted this would be able to ascend into a higher spiritual plane called the next level. And in May 1974, a woman that they knew already from Houston became their first recruit, Sharon Morgan. She abandoned her family to join them, but she quit after a month when they started using her credit cards. After this, their recruitment tactics got a bit more sophisticated. They used magazine ads to target people who were already open to, the idea of aliens. And then they would share their revelations at these organized meetings. And by all accounts, Applewhite and Nettles, who went by the nicknames Doe and T, and they were also called the UFO 2. They were very charismatic and very convincing. At one event in LA in 1975, about 25 people joined, but it was the recruitment of around 20 people in the tiny town of Waldport, Oregon in September that year that drew attention from the press. It was even covered on CBS News. This is the mid-70s. It's a golden age of new religions and cults. But even so, Heaven's Gate, although it wasn't called that at the time, it went through loads of different names. Heaven's Gate was just the last one. It stood out because these new recruits literally seemed to vanish. They had met, and this wasn't LA, this was a small town. 20 people had basically gone missing. They'd abandoned all their possessions, cut off all contact with their friends and family, and they had seemed to have vanished. In reality, they were basically living as drifters and sleeping on the street. The group drifted from town to town. They were sleeping in tents. They were begging on the street while also spreading this sort of esoteric gospel that was combining Christianity that people in these towns in the South and the Midwest would be familiar with these elements of New Age philosophy and aliens and elements of world religions.
They believed that they personally were in the Bible. Their kind of enlightenment moment was when they were reading the book of Revelation one day and became convinced they were the 2 witnesses mentioned in the book of Revelation. Quote, "And I will grant my 2 witnesses authority to prophecy for 1,260 days, wearing sackcloth." They read that and thought, oh, that's us Jesus is talking about. And that was the key that unlocked for them what their purpose was. And they married it, as you say, with very evocative imagery of the time. And as we head into the 80s, obviously all the sort of Spielberg movies, they loved Cocoon and Close Encounters and stuff like that, and believed that UFOs were the key to salvation. I don't want to spend too much time on their actual beliefs, because obviously they're complete bollocks, but they thought that flying saucers were the means of transport to the kingdom of heaven. It would be via spaceships that they would leave this planet behind. And so when we got to, we'll do the bit in the middle in a minute, but the important thing is when we got to this year, 27 years into this religion being practiced, what was happening in the skies was the presence of the Hale-Bopp comet. And the widely circulated conspiracy at the time was that if you squinted, you could see something on the back of it that looked a bit like a spaceship. And what's clear is that this is the moment that Applewhite thinks, right, this must be the sign, this must be the vehicle, this must be the exit.
Yeah, and really honestly, they had this very literal interpretation of how they were going to ascend to heaven. So much so that they thought, that their bodies would get onto a spaceship and go on the spaceship. And that whole theory had to be massively reimagined after, in 1985, Bonnie Lou Nettles died of cancer. And obviously, that sense that she was one of the people who was going to take this group to heaven now
and
had
be
to be reimagined. Yeah. So
let's reverse engineer this one.
Yeah, and so and really honestly, in that period of re-engineering, they lost a lot of followers and then had to start rebuilding again in the 1990s. And at this stage, then the Ascendancy didn't have to be quite so literal, which is how they then came to depart their bodies and go on the spaceship, not literally by being picked up by it. But also, once you hit the 90s, then their means for getting followers got even more sophisticated. They were using computers and video production and kind of the emerging internet to spread the message to attract new followers. Then by the mid-90s, they had started to rebuild into a much more significant cult than they had been for the last decade.
Yeah, and in the 90s, the group had started to become the subject of lots of magazine features and news coverage. And it's thought that this may have been a contributing factor in Applewhite's decision to announce this mass suicide. Actually, just a few weeks before it happened, Louis Theroux had been in touch with them because he wanted to do an episode of Weird Weekends about Heaven's Gate, but he was told it would be, quote, an interference with what we must focus on, which is quite eerie in retrospect.
Yeah, we've got a weird Thursday planned. But, it's not going to stretch the weekend.
Tomorrow.
She was in exile now, but at some point she was going to get drowned or poisoned or speared.
Ditch the ads and get a Sunday episode when you join Club Retrospectors. Patreon.com/retrospectors.